calculating it, but without numbers, just simply looking at their overall roster, what they've done, how you have talked about what Daryl Morey in the front office had done in putting this together, and do they have to win a championship year one to validate everything that was done, or is there a little wiggle room there on how it gets done? Because I'm big on how did it happen.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to get your thoughts.
No, I mean, I'm not going to say they need to win a championship year one, in part because that's just tough
Coward.
to do. I don't care if you are a veteran team that's been together forever. The odds are always going to be in the field's favor. I don't even care. And when you add in the fact that this is their first year together, like there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period. But to me, what they need to do is they need to look like a championship contender. And that means three things for me. That means getting out of the second round of the playoffs. I'm very rarely this guy, but like I almost don't care about context. Like it's got to happen one year. You've got to be able to find a way. Needs to beat another team that I would classify as a championship contender. So like I don't care. They've had a couple of years here where they've lost to incredible teams. Toronto, Boston 2 years ago, taking them really close. That's great. If that happens in the conference finals after you've already beaten another championship, like let's say they beat the Knicks in round 2 and they lose to Boston in 7 in the conference finals, I'm not going to say that's a failure. That's progress forward. That's playing 2 incredible series. It's disappointing for sure, but it's something to build off of. So those to me are the 2 must-haves you need to build to at least get out of the second round. Like you've got to get past that hump at some point. And you've got to beat a real legitimate contender along the way. If you end up losing the conference to like the Atlanta Hawks of 2025 in the conference finals, that's not good enough. You can't have an embarrassment. That I think is maybe the third consideration. But there are certainly outcomes that
don't
fall
make
short.
us look bad. That's what it's always about, right? Like,
make the city proud of you.
Give us a deep run for conversation for sure.
That's where I would start. I'm not going to go as far as say they have to win a championship. That's still exceedingly tough to do, even if you A+ the offseason. But you do have to give the fans something to believe in.
So, Kyle, the 7 playoff appearances they've had for Joel Embiid's tenure here as the franchise player, 5 second-round exits for them. The other 2, of course, first-round exits, the bubble, and last season against the New York Knicks in round 1. What do you think when it comes to this after everything that Derek just laid out and, of course, the roster construction?
I will not accept a loss to any team other than the Celtics. I think that's the only team that you could say, because of how they're positioned, the age of their guys, they're going to basically be, I think after the season, right? They'll be like a $500 million team. I love what their ownership has done, which is get all the talent, pay all the talent, and now they're like, hey, we want to sell before we have to actually pay up for this team, right?
Their accountant showed what it's going to take to keep them around.
It is a genius move on behalf of Celtics ownership. But so they are, I hammer this home on this show all the time. And Joel has ended multiple seasons at the press table saying something like this, that continuity matters. It is so hard to just build something on the fly, even within 1 year. Like I do think the way they've set it up, I do think this team is positioned to potentially win a title this year. I'm a big skeptic of if you're making a trade at the deadline and that's your path to getting, one of your top 3 guys, one of your most important players. I am not a believer in that being a recipe for winning a title. When you're able to assemble what we think is, I'd say, most of the championship roster, right? They might make one splash move at the deadline, but that's going to be for, I'd say on the high end, that'll be like your 5th starter or maybe a 6th man, that type of player. You're going to get depth then. If you get depth at the deadline to fill out around Paul George, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, I think you can get there, and I don't think the path is that strange as long as you're healthy. I will not accept a loss to Doc Rivers and the Milwaukee Bucks. I will not accept a loss to Jalen Brunson, your cousin, and the New York Knicks. I think their top-end talent is better than those teams. Their depth is slightly better in terms of the star-level talent. And I do think, before you get to Boston, they at least can compete with like top 6, 7 of these other teams. And so I just don't see, if you're a believer in Joel Embiid, which broadly speaking I am, if you're a believer in Tyrese Maxey, which I am, if you're a believer in Paul George as a third guy, I am. Nick Nurse as a head coach, I am. there's just no real way you can look at it and say, okay, they gave this guy a max contract to be part of a big three. They gave Joel a proper backup so he doesn't have to play every back-to-back and can get reasonable time off. I don't see a clear or coherent reason to say we should accept anything other than minimum conference finals. And ideally, you're finally able to slay the Celtics somehow, whether it's because Joel just dominates that matchup, whether it's because Paul George is able to make that much of a difference in terms of what that looks like, give you a real wing against a team that is heavy on their wing play. I don't see the excuses. I want to see it get done. Maybe they get there and they're not healthy and we'll have to run it back all over again. But we go into this assuming, at least hoping, full health for everybody. And so I say any team that beats them other than the Celtics in the East, I think you would not only deserve to be upset about, I think you deserve to be pissed off that they couldn't get it done.
Right now, I still do look at them and I say it's Boston and that's it. I've put them ahead of New York after Hartenstein left and went to Oklahoma City. The roster construction...
Impressive restraint of bias right there. I'm proud of you.
The roster construction that is now in terms of the depth, I gave that to New York because I thought Hartenstein was going to come back, maybe take a little bit less when we started to hear about the Jalen Brunson stuff. And now you have Mitchell Robinson coming off the bench with Hart, DiVincenzo, McBride, and they have 9 deep. Now it's 8 deep, which is still very good. And the Sixers, though, have 3 top end. And then you have the other guys that go on from 4 all the way down to, let's say, 8, 9, where it's a conversation. It's a real discussion of where they are neck and neck. But I think that what we saw in the postseason, we all thought they should have beat the Knicks in round 1. Yeah. They should have. And the Boston Celtics were the team that stood in everyone's way. So if they get to a spot again where they're playing Boston, advance past the second round for the first time, they get to Boston and they're playing them. Probably Boston is a 1 seed, Sixers as a 2 or 3 playing on the road. And how it happens, maybe I'll fall back a little bit and say that. But for right now, for me, and I look at it, I say you have to get to the championship. What happens in the NBA Finals, I don't know. But getting to the championship for me, putting yourself, yes, 1 step ahead of where you have been since 2001 and getting past the second round, okay, that's great. But if this team is what I think they are, now that Morey has put this thing together with Paul George as that third option, as much as they talked about it and that continuity, and they talked about it on Tuesday and championship and wanting to win, there's been some real disappointments. Paul George not being in the Sixers uniform, but being in the Clippers and Indiana and OKC uniform where it hasn't happened for him. The jokes that come with the playoff P thing because he hasn't gotten it done. And Embiid and Tyrese Maxey, that speaks for itself because we've seen that firsthand here. So I say NBA Finals. I'm not worried about the championship part yet, but when you get there, you might as well win.
So if we, win in the second round, then get blown out in the conference finals, is anyone going to care? And my response to that has always been, though, beat someone of significance so the fans at least have something to grab onto, something to give them confidence for future seasons because you never have beaten anyone of significance. That's why my get to the conference finals included, but there's also another qualification. You have to beat a fellow championship contender along the way. At that point, I will.
You got to take out Giannis. You got to take out Brunson. You got to take out
somebody
one
who's
of these
been there
teams.
before, done it before. Somebody who is another contender in your path. Something so at least fans can go, all right, look, I'm disappointed we didn't win the conference finals or we didn't win the finals, whatever the end result is. But at least we did this, so I can believe in you for next year. That's the one thing that's always been missing from this squad, from the Joel Embiid era. They've just never beaten anyone who's really given you any kind of confidence going forward. So I think you need to get farther than last year and beat someone of significance along the way.
We all silly like the mayor.